Hi everyone. This game is from round 9 of the Tata Steel Vikan tournament 2017 between Chinese prodigy uh, GM Wei and from the winner of a qualifier for this year's A section, GM Adhiban. And Adhiban has been showing some good fighting chess in his debut to the top section here at Vikan. So this was an interesting battle, this young prodigy versus this up and coming qualifier. Okay, now Wei Yi is outrating Adiban by about 50, 60 points, um, but Adiban definitely shows that he belongs. All right, let's look at the game. So Wei has the white pieces, and Adiban has the black pieces. Okay, knight f3. And we're gonna go through this game fast because the opening phase fast because of the length of the game. Okay, this was a very long game, but it was exciting, and I just want to share some key points and variations with you. So knight f3, knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, d4, castle, and now we have a king's Indian defense. Right, d6, h3, and Adibon plays this line with knight a6, which kind of tends to um, take the game into some type of Benoni positions sometimes, because sometimes black will play a c5 here. Bishop e3 is played, c6. Normally, black would be trying to play for e5, so the knight perhaps would be on c6 and then play e5. So these are like some offbeat lines here. So after bishop e3, c6. So black has a different plan. His plan is to play b5 and then reposition this knight. Rook c1, knight c7. And you see this in the Benoni sometimes. The bishop come here to d7 and you'll see this idea of b5, or sometimes a6 and b5 together. And then of course subsequently at the b4, this indirect attack on the e pawn. So bishop e2, b5, e5. And remember that response, b5, e5. You always want to have that uh, as a response to b5 in many of these type of positions. You'll see this in the Pyrrhic variation, modern defense, any of these type of kingside fianchetto defenses where black plays a c6 and b5 or a6 b5. E5 is a common rejoinder, and we see that black's queenside pawns become a little weak here. So e5, d takes, and knight d7. So we see the purpose of these modern type defenses is black's argument is that this e pawn is somewhat overexposed. C takes b5, and Adibon plays c takes b5. Okay, if knight takes e5, then black would be losing after queen takes d8, rook d8, knight takes e5, bishop takes e5, and b takes c6. Okay, he's just down material. If he tries this in between move here, it's even worse. And again, black is just suffering a loss of material. The rook is on prise, and it's just a brutal way to go out. So even though he wants to play knight takes e5, he can't play it right now. Another alternative was knight takes b5, but after knight takes b5, c takes b5. white simply castles. Bishop b7 and e6, and this gives white a nice positional advantage, and we see the weakness right here of this advanced pawn. Just want to point out, after knight takes b5, c takes b5, white cannot afford to take the pawn right away because of the simple queen a5 check and dropping the bishop, and it would be white losing. So this is why Adhiban opted for c takes b5. Wei castled, and now he's prepared to take this pawn. And Adhiban played bishop b7. Right, he didn't try to hold this pawn and play a6. This at the a6, white can develop some type of initiative with this move right here, knight e6, which can be annoying. For example, if knight takes d5, queen takes d5 with the challenge to the rook, rook fd1, and you see the harassment on the C and D files, for example. That's just a sample. Adhiban plays bishop b7, just trying to make sure he gets full development and gets his pieces untangled. Again, as we looked at in the last variation, this pawn is on prise. Knight takes e5, and we know that's something that black wants to do. Now, my argument is that he could have done it. If knight takes e5, knight takes e5, bishop takes e5, and then bishop f3. This is the reason why Adhiban didn't take the pawn. So there's rook b8, queen takes d8, rook takes d8, and bishop takes a7. And this is why he opted to play bishop b7 first. He would be losing after this sequence. And I just want to point out also that this is no big deal. Bishop h6, simply queen takes d1, rook fd1, and bishop g7. And that's equal. So the critical line here after black takes the pawn is knight takes, bishop takes, and then bishop f3 attacking this rook. Now we already established that rook b8 is no good because of the attack right here. So those bishops are really powerful on e3 and f3. However, this is a move I found analyzing, which I think is playable, and it's b4. Knight has to move e2. If bishop takes a8, then simply b takes c3. Bishop comes back. C takes b2, and say for example rook c5, bishop d6, and rook c2. And this is perfectly fine for black. For instance, a move like bishop a6, right, f5, aggressive moves. So after b4, knight e2, right, not taking the rook, bishop a6, he allows the rook to be captured, right, gives up the exchange, rook e1, getting out of that pin on f1, knight e6, queen b3, queen b7, and this is another possibility here. And this is interesting also, and I would give white a nod there in that position. So if you can take the central pawn and get away with it without paying too high of a price, one should take it. So only time will tell, I think, but I do think that this pawn could have been taken and black would have been okay. But he has to play this move b4 and be willing to give up the exchange. But instead, he didn't play knight takes e5. He just played bishop b7. Now he's threatening knight takes e5, right? So we just saw all of the things happening on that diagonal, and he plays bishop b5. Wei just simply snaps off the pawn on b5, and knight d5 is played. Again, we have to think about this pawn. Why not take that pawn? Now here, I just showed you the reason why black didn't take it before. He wanted to secure this diagonal. Now here, after knight takes b5, bishop takes b5, and now take the pawn. Knight takes, knight takes. All of this is pretty much force and leads to equality. So I think black definitely should take at this point. After Wei Yi snaps that pawn, just go and exchange the pieces off, and this is a comfortable, a comfortable position for black. Okay, white just has this 2-1 queenside majority, but without any other weaknesses, it would be very, very difficult for white to win that. Instead, Adhiban played knight d5, and it looks respectable because he's threatening to destroy white's pawn structure with knight takes e3 and win the bishop here, so why not? However, Wei has this beautiful in-between move where he plays e6. Okay, and now I think at this point, if Adhiban was going to take the bishop here, he should have just took it anyway. Play knight takes e3, and of course, Wei could play that in-between check. And then you have this type of position, which is symmetrical. The only thing, though, is that here black is down a pawn right now. And this move is a little bit too dangerous right now because of a move like rook c7 with this attack on the knight and bishop, and just flat out winning for white. So instead of trying to regain that pawn right away, he would have to play a move like knight e5. And white just has a clear advantage there after knight c7. So instead of knight takes e3, after e6, he copped out to f takes e6, and we see the rapid deterioration of the black pawn structure after his attempt to gain space on the queen side. We see Wei handled that pretty good, and now we have a 2-1 majority on the queen side for white. Double E pawns in the center, and it looks like white is well on his way to chalking up a victory, but there's still a lot of chess to be played. Queen b3, just getting on the diagonal, threatening discoveries against the bishop here, and pressuring the a2 to g8 diagonal. Okay, knight e5, knight takes, bishop takes, bishop g4, pressure, pressure, pressure. King h8. He says, "Hey, you can have the pawn. I'm getting my king off of that diagonal." Wei does not take the pawn right away, but he plays bishop d4 instead. Why not attack the piece? Bishop takes e6 can be played, but it gives black some play. Then he can return to that old idea of knight takes right here, getting the bishop here. You see, and white is still somewhat better. Let's go rook b1. It's somewhat better, but it's giving black some counterplay there. You see, black just has this isolated backward pawn to worry about. White's pieces are somewhat slightly superior, but black has these two bishops. The position's wide open, so it was a wise move for Wei to avoid capturing on e6. Instead, he plays bishop d4. Why not denude the black king by removing his main protector? Bishop f6 happens, and he played bishop takes f6. And then black responds with rook takes f6. Now I know you're wondering about e takes f6. E takes f6 could have been played. So e takes f6, knight c7. Remember the discovery against the bishop, because the name of the game for white is to simplify at this point. Queen takes b7, knight d5, and then bishop takes e6. And we see white up with the extra pawn. So taking with the rook secures this e6 pawn at the end of the combination. Knight c7, rook b8, knight takes e6. So again, it looks like Wei Yi is just rolling. Queen 5 just attacking. Bishop a6. Attack on the rook here. And the queen. And this is a nice fun move right here that Wei Yi gets to play. Bishop e6. Rook takes b3. Bishop takes g8. And this is falling right into white's hands, because black was playing for dynamic chances, and he just ended up with a busted endgame. King g8. Knight takes b3. Bishop takes f1. King takes f1. Nice move, right? Keeping the rook on c1 on the open file and moving the king toward the center. Knight b4, attacking a2. Going to the 7th rank, keeping the rook aggressive. And now here's where I feel Adhiban started playing like really, really, really well. He started defending his tail off here. Now, before we get into what he did, let's look at this position. We see that white is up a pawn here, and black's pawns are attacked on a7 and e7. So white is already up material, and he's attacking more material. Black has 3 pawn islands, the H and G pawns, the E pawn and the A pawn. The A and E pawns are isolated. White's pawn structure is good. He just has 2 pawn islands, 2 connected pawns on the queen side, which constitute a 2-to-1 majority. And he has his 3 pawns intact on the king side. His king is also closer to the center, ready at a moment's notice to enter the center by e2. And so he has a clear advantage. On the black side, black, to compensate for all of his weakness, actually there's not enough compensation, but to mitigate his weakness, he has good piece activity. The rook on f6 is pressuring the f2 pawn, and the knight right now is threatening the capture on on a2. So the activity of black is sailing on to a smooth positional victory, and this is kind of the battle for the rest of the game. Is black's activity versus white trying to basically corral the the horses, so to speak, and rein in the extra point. Okay, because he's up material, and all he has to do is just get everything consolidated and queen his extra pawn. Black has to stay as active as possible. So now black could have played knight takes a2, but Adhiban plays knight d3, so he keeps threatening. So f2 is threatened, and b2. So he jumps out with king e2, and Adhiban plays knight f4. If knight takes b2, then simply rook takes a6. And this is not bad for white at all. This is up white's alley, even though black, still has some chances. I like the move Adhiban play. He's just staying active. It's king f1, knight d3, so he wants that perpetual. Now rook d7, and now knight takes b2, rook takes a7. So we see an analogous position. However, when he comes back to d3, it's with tempo, threatening other like moves like rook f2 check. So f3, rook e6, and he's just harassing the white's position. See how he can't get the king over right now? King g1, knight f4, rook d7, knight e2, and this is a long game, so I'm just gonna go through these kind of quick. Knight c3, d2, and you get the gist of it. Is white is trying to consolidate and trying to find the right time to advance that a pawn, but we see all the pressure that black is putting on it. Right now, he's threatening to win it. So knight c1, he forces white into a defensive situation. King f7, e3. However, with black moving his rook to a6, it frees the king, and now the white king can enter. So king e6, both kings race to the center, and now we see more harassment from Adhiban. And we see all these checks, and Wei Yi must find a way to. He's trying to find a way to advance the a pawn safely. Okay, he doesn't just want to start advancing it and then it gets picked off. And now here king d3 is played. Now if a4 here, it's possible. Maybe and this is just a sample line. Rook b1, rook b2, rook a1 behind the pawn, right? And then king b4. There's a lot of play to go, but that's possible. Wei played king d3, rook a6, check. Okay, rook d3, and now knight f8 was played by Wei Yi, attacking these pawns, one on h7 and one on g6. Again, a4 has to be considered, right? Because now, notice before when I mentioned a4, there was like a cluster of black pieces around, right? It's like about during this time. So it's kind of, with all of these pieces here on the 6th and 7th ranks, it's hard to really conceive of getting a4 in at the moment, because everything is guarding this area. It's hard to, the rook is here, king is right there, the knight is here, so maybe it's not too wise to push at that time, although I had, showed you this variation. However, by this time, and we're on move 56, look at the pieces. Only thing really guarding that a file now is the king. The rook is here, and knight is here on d6. So here's another sample line of a4 now. There's knight b7, right? Stopping it. Rook e2, attacking the other pawn, the e pawn. Rook d5. King c4. King c6. c3. Knight c5, knight c5. And now we're in a pure rook and pawn ending. And we still have some ways to go, but white still has an advantage, but we can see how difficult it is to advance that a pawn with this variation. Um, that's why that old saying is true in a lot of cases, that all rookie games are drawn. They're notorious. Even though you have an advantage, you can put the position in the engine, and it seems like you should be winning, and it'll be, a draw somehow. But I like this particular position for white. But of course, there's many different ways it could go. Again, this is just a sample line. But a4 is definitely something that should be considered at that point. But knight f8 is no joke either, because it is a direct attack to the pawn. And it is very difficult to protect those pawns. Adhiban played rook d4. And here he played king b3, which is interesting. King c3 is also interesting to me. Knight b4, king b2. And again, these pawns very hard to protect. Say e4, getting rid of that weakness. Whoops, excuse me. And now you just start eating these up. So here with king b3, knight f5. Now we got king c3, knight e3. And we see the difficulties which white is facing, trying to convert his advantage. King b2, rook c7. So after all of that, now we see the pawn is protected, and the knight is in a precarious spot here. So rook d2, b7, knight e6 from Wei, king c6, c1, a lot of maneuvering. Okay, 7, knight g5, knight f6, again attacking the weakness. King d5, and now here's a critical moment. What is wrong with the attacking move h6? I'll give a sample line here. So rook c2, check. And now you trade off those knights, and then you go into this rook and pawn ending. So with this move, rook a4, now you force this rook to be on the defensive. And again, it's difficult to convert the advantage for white. And at this point, it looks like a draw, because with this rook on the a file, I mean, this king cannot get in front of this pawn to be able to support its advance, and the rook is tied to the drift over there. Then these h and g pawns will become deadly. Okay, so that's just a sample line right there. Again, after h6, which I think is great move. Again, because there's nowhere else for this knight to really go. Of course, if it goes to the 7th rank, the rook will pick it up. If it goes to e6 and d6, and then the knight starts getting harassed. And then what happens is the rook is forced to protect the knight, and then these pawns become vulnerable to attack. And that's the idea behind this line. So the knight gets free, but white's position falls apart somewhat. Again, so here's my main line is after h6, knight e4, knight takes, going to that pure rook and pawn ending. Play rook a4, and notice the domination of the black rook. Now the king puts pressure on the e-pawn, so the rook has to stay there. And that's the idea. And this is, to me, this is definitely probably the best move in that position right here. Instead, Adhiban, he might have been tired or just didn't see the idea or miscalculated it. He plays king d5, which looks reasonable. I mean, he's bringing the king in the center and pressing himself toward the black position. And he puts his pieces in the center. It's hard for, and then finally h6 is there. He winds up dropping another pawn, and now he's down 2 pawns. Rook d4. Wei Yi gives up that pawn. And that's the thing that he was trying to avoid. I mean, see, if he plays that, then he just drops the pawn from the fork. And that was the dilemma he had to face for a lot of moves, was when is it safe to advance this a pawn. So he finally tries to advance it, and then he loses it pretty much straight away, straight out of the box. Now, he's calculated that he's going to have those 2 pawns. But look how active black's pieces are. Black is swarming with just the knight and the rook over the black position. Now look at that move, right? You can see that the king is drawn to a2, is forced, and this is just a fantastic move. I give this a double exclam for Adhiban, because this is like, the 83rd move. He's been defending a long time, and he still has the wherewithal to look for the tactics. So after Wei Yi takes this pawn, he finds this beautiful move which forces a draw. This is a guaranteed draw. The reason why is because the white king is too far away from the pawns to assist in pushing his pawns up the board. Okay, there's always going to be situations where the knight can even sacrifice itself for one of the pawns, and knights are not that good at escorting pawns up the board by themselves, because it's easy to just walk the king right next to the knight and attack it. Now, a rook or a bishop, it'd be different, right? The white would be winning, because the king cannot just walk up to those pieces that easily. Those long range pieces, they can just swing over to the other side of the board while still aiding and supporting the advance of the pawns. The knight has to be right next to the pawns in order to help them advance up the board, and that's a weakness. And so let's see the conclusion of the game. H4, and you can look this up too on the Nalimov table basis. Put this position and you'll see that it's a draw also, because I checked this position, but when I first saw it, I knew it was a draw because of the king on a2. There's no way that that knight on g6 will be able to get those pawns safely up the board. On h4, knight f6, so we see the first idea of just simply blockading the advance of the pawn. Notice this pawn cannot advance also. Right, freezing him. Knight e5. He wants to play that. So king c3. So now the king is getting ready to join in the fun. King d4. Like I said, king can walk right up to the knight and remove him from his blockading duties. So therefore, those pawns cannot be advanced successfully. King e3. And the white king is just too far away to be of any assistance. See? King f2. And there's one pawn, and The knight is attacked now, so the knight has to move away. And now this pawn is attacked. Can't move, right? It will be captured on h5. So, last bit of humor by GM Wei. Plays knight takes e4, and of course, just simply king takes h4. He could even play that if he wanted to be funny. Knight takes e4. Then after h5, you know, he could still draw the game by sacrificing the knight. But after knight e4 check, excuse me, after knight e4, yeah, after knight e4 check, the king just took on h4, and can't mate with the king and the knight alone. So you need at least a pawn on the board to do that. So that was the conclusion of a well played and well fought game. My analysis of that and conclusion is that Adhiban definitely should try to improve that variation if he's going to play that again, because I'm sure GMs will be all over that and probably would beat him next time if he played the same way again. But this time, this day, he made out and he was able to hold a very, very tough position. And kudos to him for just finding the correct plan and staying super active in the position. Because I thought early on in the game that GM Wade definitely was just going to grind him out in the ending. So, hope you enjoyed that. I hope you learned something. And as usual, please support the channel, like, and subscribe. And I'll see you guys on the next video.